Hello, and welcome to the first episode in our series of applied research webinars. Today, our topic of focus is bridging the digital divide. My name is Lanny Cohen, and I'm Capgemini's Group Chief Innovation Officer, and lead our global applied innovation network, currently in 18 locations across the globe. I will be your host today. As technology transforms how we live our lives, apply for jobs, access opportunities, and engage with the world around us, questions of access and affordability are paramount. We all must engage on the question of how technology can be deployed to bridge gaps and create new opportunities, not deepen existing inequality. Usually, this topic is looked at from a social and public policy point of view, and while there is growing awareness and activity from both these sides, the problem persists. On today's webinar, we are joined by experts representing society, business, and technology who will share their expertise on the value that closing the digital divide brings to society and business and perspectives on how to approach it. Whatever your position may be, the what and why of this topic are certainly critical, but the how is where actions will emerge, and certainly applying innovation will be part of the solution. Today, we will also go through the Capgemini Research Institute's latest comprehensive research, The Great Digital Divide. I am delighted that we are joined by a stellar panel of experts today. Joining us are Angela Siefer, Executive Director from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, Claudia Crummerno, Global Vice President, People and Organization at Capgemini Invent, and Lucy Tarin, Global Head of Digital Inclusion at Capgemini. Also presenting key findings from the Digital Divide study will be our expert from Capgemini's Research Institute, Marissa Slatter. Hello, Angela, Claudia, Lucy, and Marissa. Let's get started with a look at the research findings first, followed by a panel discussion and concluding with questions and answers with our audience members. In the meantime, if you have any questions for our experts, please leave them on the chat window and we'll pick them up at the end of the session today. Marissa, you worked on the latest study released by the Capgemini Research Institute on digital divide. Could you please take us through some of the key findings?
Great. Yes, thank you, Lanny. Next slide, please. So our global research program covered 6 countries, and we surveyed over 1,300 offline people via in-person interviews and telephone interviews. And we wanted to explore the reasons why people are offline and the disadvantages they face. And we conducted this research just prior to the current health crisis, but we find that these findings are even now more relevant as the pandemic has intensified the digital divide. Next slide, please. So we found some surprising findings in terms of the demographics of our offline population. So one is younger people constitute the largest share of the offline population in our sample. So 43% of offline respondents are between the ages of 18 and 36 years old. Also, most offline people have not always been offline. So 59% of offline respondents have previously used the internet. So in our study, we defined offline people as those who have never used the internet, as well as those who have not used it in the last year and are not using it currently. And then third, we found that nearly a third of offline people are actually employed full-time. So 28% are employed full-time, but of those workers, of those full-time workers, 75% are living in poverty. Next slide. So our research looked at 4 key themes. So the key reasons that are keeping people away from the internet, the consequences of being offline today, why the offline population is actually keen to use the internet, and then lastly, how organizations, both private and public sector, can support greater digital inclusion. So we found that there was not one universal cause for why people are offline. the reasons were very different by specific segment. So cost, complexity, and a lack of interest are the three main reasons that emerged from our study. So on the cost side, we found that this is a key reason for younger people as well as people living in rural areas. So as this slide shows the level of agreement with various reasons for being offline. We found that over 1 in 2 offline people aged 22 to 36 say the expense of an internet device or subscription is the main reason why they have never gone online, and this is compared to all other age groups. Moving forward, we also see cost as the key reason for offline people living in rural communities. So 47% of offline people living in rural areas say they have never used the internet because the subscription is too expensive, and similarly 44% say the device is too expensive. The internet being complex or difficult to use is a key reason for being offline for people with a long-term health condition or a disability. So we found that 65% of offline people with a health condition believe that the internet is too difficult, as displayed on this graph, versus 36% of all other people. And similarly, 61% of offline people with a disability say the same. Now, thirdly, one of the main reasons we found is that there's this perceived lack of interest in using the internet among offline people 60 plus, as well as females. So more than 3 in 5 offline people aged 60 plus reported that they're just not interested in using the internet. And we qualify this in that lack of interest can really mean a few different things. So it can stem from fear, from a lack of confidence or lack of skills, or just a lack of experience in using the internet. And this trend is also a key driver among offline females in our research. So 54% say they have never used the internet because they're just not interested, versus 43% of males. So another key theme we looked at was how being offline impacts all aspects of life today. And the ability to have access to the internet and digital skills really improves everyday life, and that lack of access can negatively impact everyday life. So we see social exclusion occurring, particularly in this current health crisis, where people are isolated, loneliness, feelings of loneliness can emerge and intensify. And so people without access to technology, to internet, won't be able to communicate with their friends and families as easily as those with internet. Certainly there's an impact on career mobility. So offline populations have challenges just applying to jobs online or getting access to online education and digital skills development. We also see an impact on access to public services. So as e-government takes hold and more governments are moving online or public services online, there's an impact on offline people and their ability to access services that are rightfully theirs. Also, we see impacts on financial hardship. So there's been studies that have shown essential goods and services can be cheaper online, and so offline people don't have access to those products. And then lastly, impact on health. So given how the internet allows for a wealth of information at your fingertips, that lack of access can create health asymmetries where, in the long term, it can lead to poorer health outcomes, both physical and mental health outcomes. Despite all of these challenges, we found that the offline population is indeed keen to take advantage of the internet. So 48% of offline people globally in our sample agreed that they would like to get internet access in the future. And you see on the slide the differences by country. And also, many offline people do recognize the opportunities that internet access can afford. So 46%, as an example, say that if they had access to the internet, they would feel more connected to friends and family. And then lastly, we wrapped up our study with recommendations on how to support greater digital inclusion and bridge the digital divide, which my panelists as well will be discussing today. So responsibility for digital inclusion and universal access doesn't fall to one group. It really requires the contribution of a variety of stakeholders. So here, for private organizations in particular, investing in digital inclusion as part of a CSR initiative. Also, educating people on how to stay safe online. So doing some learning and development, particularly among older individuals that might have a fear of using the internet. Also, recruiting candidates from marginalized communities into the workforce and helping them build those digital skills. For policymakers and governments, certainly there's room for improvement in making devices and internet more accessible to marginalized communities, as well as creating greater accessibility for online public services. And then lastly, focusing on public and private partnerships is very important here, as well as educating and bringing more awareness to disadvantaged offline populations on the value that internet can afford. And yes, so those are the main findings from the global research program.
Thanks, Marissa. One question that came in is, and maybe you just provide some additional clarity on this, is how are we defining the level of internet usage, recognizing it that some use it for social media purposes, some actually use it for things like financial transactions and everything in between?
Sure, no, that's a great question. So the sample of offline people, the 1,300 offline people, actually have no use. So they either have never used the internet for any purpose, and they've never gone online, or they have previously been online, but not within the past year. And so that includes access and use either on their own device or on a shared device. So this population absolutely has no use. But of course, there is, we did also survey online people as well to make some comparisons, and the level of use, we had a variety of individuals from, as you say, only using it for social media versus using it every day for work. But this offline population is absolutely no use.
You mentioned about some of the more striking findings, and the one about the age category that was I think one of those. It was interesting. I think when I looked at the research, one of the things that struck me, you made a comment about this, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit more. In 2018, Paul Hawking did a piece of work called Project Drawdown, which is still very popular, and he looked at climate change. And the question he asked is, looking at all the factors that could positively or negatively influence climate change, what was the number one factor? And what he found was, in kind of comparing many considerations, that females, mostly young women, had the biggest impact at the end of the day on climate change. And I won't go through all the details why, this isn't about that. But I find it very interesting in this study that females emerge as a demographic that is really challenged from an internet usage perspective. And if you combine kind of the potential impact they can have on so much in society, and then we see this kind of finding, Any additional insights about that female demographic that you can share?
Sure. One thing I will certainly say is that we do have a bias in our samples towards underprivileged population. So 69% of the offline population in our survey are below the poverty line as defined by each country. So and females again have the majority of females in our survey are also below the poverty line. So given this, the age is sort of the main criterion for being offline when you consider if you look at the whole population at large, age might be the main criterion for being offline. But when you consider populations that are underprivileged, age matters less, say, than your income levels or your education. And I think that is probably, that's our hypothesis for the age finding, and that also may be the case for females as well. So when you look at females with an underprivileged background, they're more likely, according to our research, to be offline. So I think, again, here, income matters, particularly for the young and for females.
Okay, terrific. Let's move on now. If there's any other questions on the research from Marissa, please submit them. And then we'll also at the end remind you where you can get access to a full copy of the research as well. So Marissa, thanks again for a very interesting overview. We'll now speak with our panel of experts on their views and the work they're doing. And let me begin with Angela. Angela, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. The National Digital Alliance does a lot of work furthering digital inclusion, including creating and promoting the Digital Equity Act. Could you start by giving us a brief introduction of all the terrific work you do?
Thanks for having me, Lanny. I'm with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I'm located in Columbus, Ohio. The National Digital Inclusion Alliance got started about 5 years ago because in the United States, we didn't have a national organization representing the interests and policy decisions of the digital inclusion programs that are on the ground. So in the US, and this is true in many countries, the organizations that are providing support to disadvantaged populations to help them get online, to have the devices, the internet connection, the digital literacy support, it's very grassroots. Few countries have a holistic national federal kind of plan, which is very much needed. So which is why NDIA bases our work on learning from those folks on the ground, helping them talk to each other, the best practices that get shared, but then we learn from that and then work on policy issues in the US.
Okay, terrific. Our collective experience through the current COVID crisis has shown that the online world reflects existing social inequalities. And if anything, this crisis has, further underscored this and probably exacerbated it as well. Do you think it's time that the internet was considered a public utility?
I find the conversation around considering the internet a public utility to be fascinating. Of course, I've been working on this for decades now, and so finally other people saying this is really important is pretty awesome. I think the important point to think about is, what do we mean when we think it should be a public utility? I think we're talking about everybody having access. So what does it mean for everybody to have access? It means the infrastructure needs to be there. It needs to be affordable. As the research findings show, cost is a really important factor. So we have to figure out, how can we have a market rate that is affordable for middle income folks? How do we subsidize it for folks that even that market rate isn't affordable? And then how do we also make sure that there's a device and that we have the digital literacy support available? We know from urban areas and where it's available, if you build it, they may not come. So when we think of it as a utility, we are thinking about those different pieces and making sure that we have all of it to get us to everyone having access.
In a lot of the recent dialogue that's emerged, again, I think in light of the COVID crisis, a lot of the analysis would suggest that the technology side of the problem is the least of the concerns, that it's much more the other factors that you mentioned. Would you concur with that?
Absolutely. It is definitely not a technology issue. I am not a technologist. I'm a people person. I have a sociology degree, right? So like that's what I care about, and that's very much what digital inclusion is about. It's about what we can do with the technology because it's a tool, and we have it, but how do we make sure everyone has access to that tool?
Okay, terrific. Thanks so much, Angela. We'll come back to you again in a second. Speaking of people persons, Claudia, you've led a large-scale people and organizational changes for enterprises around the world. While we've heard from Marissa and Angela on the human and opportunity costs, what are your views on the economic impact of the digital divide, and how do you think it impacts the workforce?
Now, hopefully you can hear me.
Now we can. Start again.
Double mute on my computer. Terrific. Yes, so let me start again. So that was a very good transition because obviously my field of expertise is the people area. I've been working on digital transformation subjects since 2011 when I joined Capgemini. And the interesting part is, and that the research on the digital divide proves again, is that the human impact of the technology we're trying to implement is the one that is blocking those efforts. And looking at it from an organizational and economic point of view, I see two key impacts, right? There's one on the individual, which is huge because we're talking about employability of the future. So the divide study shows access to the internet may have impact on mobility, on career progression, and also financial if you don't have access to better and higher paid jobs. Secondly, the organization. I think organizations are missing out on a huge part of talent that they need. Our previous studies have shown that the talent gap is widening. Organizations are looking for talents all over the place in specific areas, and not tapping into all the different talents that are available in the different locations is dangerous. And then additionally, being literate in digital technology also has something to do about how competitive and future-proof the workforce is. The COVID crisis, one more time, has shown how important the ability to leverage technology and to be savvy in technology is in surviving. So it's not just a people issue that organizations have to tackle here, it's vital for their survival.
Okay, thanks so much, Claudia. Just for the audience too, I just want to share for a minute that the panelists we have today are from a variety of countries, if I didn't mention that before. So as you heard, Angela's from the US, Claudia's in Germany, and Lucy, who I'll turn to now, is in France. So if you have questions that are more aligned to kind of geographic considerations, please feel free. Let's explore some of the solutions that we should look at now. So Lucy, you lead the digital inclusion practice at Capgemini. From your experience, please tell us how business organizations and NGOs are tackling the problem.
Yeah, and hi, Lani, and hi, everybody. What I'd like also to present to you is what we have decided to focus on in Capgemini. So, of course, we need to build a strong ecosystem to make it, but we have decided to focus on 4 key areas to tackle digital inclusion. And I think it's really related to what Angela just presented before. Our first mission is digital literacy, so providing meaningful support to empower the digitally excluded to have more autonomy in accessing public and private online services and unlock new opportunities. Our second mission is focused on unemployment. Actually, our program is called Digital Academy. So it's how we can enable employment for disadvantaged population and people away from the job market who have never had the chance to get a job in the digital workplace. But through digital training, they can be employable. Our third mission is technology for positive futures, and I think you're gonna like this one because it's how we bring together technology, business, and society to solve key societal issues and deliver positive impact using our passion, technology. And the last one is around thought leadership. So how also we can work with think tanks, intellectual bodies, and joining forces with our clients, NGO partners, public bodies, and academies to continue driving impact through the digital inclusion portfolio. Another thing I can tell you with the COVID-19 crisis, what we realized that today all the teams around the world in Capgemini really try to solve solutions to help people striving with digital exclusion because they've been confined, and we have wonderful example of friends working on a free service called SOS Confinement to listen and help the people struggling with social isolation, and feeling excluded. Same in Spain. We had also a wonderful team in Norway who worked on actually building a web page for small business who could not have any business during the crisis. And also, of course, donation of tablet and a laptop with Capgemini Netherlands. So all this solution to help, of course, the access, but also more on the skills, make sure that people will not be away from technology.
Yeah, terrific, Lucy. Thank you very much. We'll come back to both Claudia and Lucy on some other perspectives in just a moment. But Angela, let me return back to you again. And while technology is a necessity, as we heard from Marissa earlier, it also inspires fear. From a learning perspective, what's your experience been in the best way to include the excluded?
In our experience, it's the trust factor between the institutions, organizations, and the staff and volunteers that they have and the learners. If the learners don't feel comfortable with whoever is providing that support to them, they can't maintain the relationship because technology is intimidating. And I think this gets to one of the questions in the chat. Using social media is different than using email even or a browser where you know somebody or you've heard stories about someone having their personal information stolen, having banking information stolen, the privacy issues with it, and even the concern that I might break it kind of issues. Those are all very real. And so I think it's important for us to understand the differences of using a banking app versus using TikTok, right? One is a little more user-friendly, TikTok, than a banking app, even though those of us who use it all think, it's all easy. But if you don't use it regularly, it can feel like, oh my gosh, this is too much for me.
Yeah, very interesting perspectives. Thank you for that. Claudia, let me come back to you because all on this kind of subject of adoption is such an important aspect of this. And emerging technologies, as we just discussed with Angela, have inspired even more fear for some time, from job losses to the fear of being left behind. And we see all the debates that have emerged in the past couple of years with automation and artificial intelligence. What can we as a society learn from organizations who have been dealing with digital transformation for a while now? And is there a map or, kind of a set of lessons learned there that can apply to this particular topic as society tries to approach digital inclusion?
Certainly. I think what we can see is that the learnings we had from trying to upskill company workers on digital tools and how to use these tools can 100% be applied in the non-organizational context. And there are great examples of how and where we can do that. I think one point I want to stress that Angela just made is you have to really think from the user or from the human that you're trying to work with. So maybe not all the different elements or learning things you use are applicable to the different target groups, let me name them like this, because in the end, when we look at how we would skill an organization for this, what we're looking at, what are the needs of the user groups that we're trying to serve? What are the fears and the uncertainties, and how are we going to overcome them? And that's how you design an effective learning program, whether that is online or offline, in the presence and face-to-face training, and how many nuggets you do. And additionally, humans learn all very differently. So you need to take that into account. Some people like to watch videos, other people like to read books, other people learn through exchange with peers. And others, again, they jump into the water and they do it just by themselves. I've seen people learning how to code just by doing it themselves and trying what works. Very impressive. So you need to take these kind of skills and make sure you work on programs and platforms to help these offline groups to approach technology. And I agree with Angela 100%. A lot is around trust and overcoming this anxiety that they don't understand, or they're not good enough in using that technology, because that's what the biggest fear is. And let me draw another conclusion. So a lot of the programs that we run are also run in a factory. So there's a lot of blue-collar workers who don't have much used technology before. They're building cars or they're building machines, and even to them, it is not easy to start using the iPad all over a sudden, or the robot. So the learnings as such are easy to transfer. It's really apply that human-centered lens and go about it. But coming back to the first statement I made, I'm so surprised how many people think that digital transformation or this age of machine that we're entering is a technology thing. It's not. It's really looking at the human element in that and how we can leverage the technology that helps us in convenience or in speed. That's what we want to use it for, and not put the technology or the AI over everything we do. There's still going to be human tasks in that, and we need to learn how to master it.
Claudia, let me kind of dive just a tad deeper on that. We've collaborated and had conversations in the past, and one of the things that we often find in terms of innovation, adoption, or digital transformation, literacy is and digital fluency, which you've all referred to, is not just an issue for kind of the workers or the blue collars, but it's often a challenge for leadership and corporations too, who have to really drive these agendas. And I think back to last summer when, at least in the United States, when some of the high-tech CEOs appeared on Capitol Hill, and it was such a disparity between our lawmakers and their level of digital literacy and fluency, and trying to converse with a Mark Zuckerberg as an example. What can you share with us, or what are some of your thoughts on how can senior executives, and if you consider that applied to policymakers perhaps, but senior executives and corporations, how do you deal with the digital literacy and the digital fluency challenges at those levels?
The same rules apply. So that's also a target group that needs to really improve literacy. And I would think that's almost the most difficult ones, because they have had success in the way they work, and they deal with problems in a long time, and that's the patterns that you need to change to learn new patterns of how you could apply digital tools and technology to their work. So actually trying to communicate through Teams or Zoom or doing that, that's not the hard part. They can test it. What is starting to get then more difficult is how does it actually change their style of communication, or the way they communicate with their teams, the way they lead, and what they have control about and what not. Because the speed of technology, the speed of know-how and knowledge that's in the organization, the speed of communication makes them lose control of all these ends that are in the air. And so how do you deal with these non-technical skills that are needed for leadership in the future? And that is foremost how to deal with the uncertainty, how to deal actually, how to be empathetic, how to be authentic, especially in a crisis like this. So the last 2 months, I think I've never had that many conversations with clients around how to lead in a virtual environment, how to establish a sense of community in this environment. And that almost comes to actually asking a personal question first. Hey, are you okay? How are you dealing? How are you doing? How are you dealing with, for example, schools being off, being a teacher, being a mother or father, being a worker at the same time? So trying to bring in this emotional part into the conversation, that's the biggest challenge. And then taking care of these problems that are brought to you, because just asking is not enough. So this emotional training, human training they need, that's the biggest hurdle that I see. And where we have to spend and think more about is how we actually make that effective to change in an organization. Because I hear over the last 9 years a lot of talk about it, but not enough follow through, or how you, consistency maybe is the right word. And that is, the reason is that the tendency of organizations is, in the times of crisis, you revert to the KPIs and to the incentives of the past. And so to stick to these incentivizing this new behavior is important for leaders to learn, not just to deal with the technology, but also with how to lead differently in this kind of time.
Great, thanks, Claudia. Lucy, let me just bring you into this part of the discussion. You know, you're in a bit of a unique position because, you know, you're one of your customers, and probably your most prominent customer is a 270,000 person organization operating across the globe and a leader in its industry. Yet, you know, your challenge is how do you, you know, raise awareness and mobilize action around this entire topic of digital inclusion when, you know, when digital inclusion isn't the day-to-day work we do, but it's something obviously we're committed to as an organization and serving our stakeholders and our communities. We want to have an impact. So with that kind of customer, i.e. Capgemini, what are some of the challenges you've seen, again, in trying to mobilize a digital inclusion effort across such a large organization?
That's a very good question, and I can say that it's 2 years now we are trying to work on it. The first challenge, and I think you told this, Lani, it's how we can actually make some awareness internally to make sure that our colleagues, we realize that digital inclusion is important. That finally, when we are working every day on shaping digital tools, we think about the people that will not feel at ease with the technology to use it. And for this, you need to, I would say, make an exercise of opening their eyes. Sorry? I'm
not sure I understand.
Go ahead, Lucy.
Okay, sorry. So that you make them realize what is digital exclusion. And for this, so that's why we decided to try to increase the opportunities of actually volunteering to go on the field and to meet these people who are struggling. Actually, not only struggling using an app. And Angela, you were speaking about banking app, and I think it's a great example, but also the people struggling with just turning off on a computer or opening a browser because they are not used to it and because they don't use it daily. And for us, working daily on technology, sometimes we forget them. So I would say the first mission for sure is awareness, raising awareness on what is digital exclusion, and then helping them to be engaged, because a lot of them, and especially now, realize they can do something. And if one of the Capgemini employees can help one person to feel digitally literate, I'm sure around you, you realize that you have people struggling. Sometimes it's like grandparents, sometimes it could be a friend, and everybody actually can feel what is the struggle with technology and how to use it. So the program we did, and actually that we are continuing to build with all the CSR teams, is actually engaging all of our employees on this mission of digital literacy. And I'm really proud to say that the interest is increasing, not only for our internal clients, but also in the conversation with external clients, with NGO, and the best ways to do is actually to reach out to the right NGO, being in contact daily with the most vulnerable, and the most vulnerable, as also Marissa said, that are the people who are most of the time the most excluded in the society, because these are the priority. And so then when you start actually increasing this interest and making some good awareness, then people want to engage more and more, because they realize it's not only the responsibility of Capgemini or the company, but that this is the responsibility of each of us and for the future. And yeah, no, I think.
Can I add something on this?
Sure, Claudia.
I think you're absolutely right. We are a technology company, and as much as is this part of Lucy's agenda, I think it is also it needs to be everybody's agenda who's working with clients on providing digital solutions to, I don't know, a government organization or another client, because it's us who designs whether these things are simple or whether they're super complicated, and how we help our clients in actually training and enabling the users. And these include all target groups, whether they are offline or online. So it's a CSR responsibility, but it's got to be our purpose as Capgemini to think about how we make better technology solutions and how we can simplify them, put them more around the human, and make that better.
Yeah, thank you both. Angela, let me just kind of bring it back to you one last time on this particular topic. And what I was, kind of getting at with the question with Lucy is, is there a role for, broad societal ambassadors? And, pardon the terminology, I just made it up. But in terms of people that, can be committed to such a topic about digital inclusion that again, we can use our workplaces, our external associations, other organization and networks we're part of, to really start to have kind of build a momentum and build awareness more broadly that we can all contribute to, addressing this challenge, or at least playing a role.
We are seeing that places that already had those ambassadors, those champions, when the virus hit and communities were struggling to make sure folks had access at home and devices and tech support, those communities were more ready because they had already been talking about it. The awareness had been building. They had already been working on various programs. So one particular city in Cleveland, Cleveland, Ohio, their community foundation had started to get engaged in the issue a couple of years ago. They already had a strong digital inclusion ecosystem. The community foundation had brought in a nonprofit computer refurbisher to get devices into the homes. And now because that community foundation knew who the partners were in the community doing the work and had expertise itself at the community foundation, that community foundation is now able to reach out to other funders and say, I was on the call and I was totally impressed, where this funder is saying, here's what I know about digital inclusion, and he knew it all. And then those other funders trusted him, right, because they were already peers. So the more we can develop, his name is Leon, the more Leons that we can have around the world, the better, right? Mm-hmm. So he understands it, and he's trusted by his peers, and he's in a leadership position.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to cover one last topic for us in the time we have left, and that's the mobile revolution brought technology to millions of people in the recent past, and along with creating new value and economic opportunities. And in the past, we've seen this with revolutionary technologies and innovations of the time, electricity, automobile, internet, and so on. And now we're at the turn of another landmark moment. And technologies of today, 5G, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, IoT, are just several examples, major disruptive technologies. And then emerging models of social coexistence with smart cities and e-government and these types of things. So my question is this, how do we ensure we apply innovation and use technology to create a more equitable society? And not kind of have to retrofit, the problem, back to the solution 10 years later. But how do we, as these things start to emerge and these new technologies begin to get applied and adopted, what can we do now to get ahead of that? So Angela, let me start with you.
Angela, you're mute, I think.
Sorry. When we think about how to integrate into those other technologies, it's thinking about the whole community. Unfortunately, what's happened too much in the past is smart city efforts, as an example, have been about the technology and not about the people. And when it is about the people, it's about the people who are already online, who already have some access. We have to look at it as the whole community. So who doesn't have basic internet access, who doesn't have the skills, who doesn't have the devices, and then bringing them into that. There is some amazing work going on where those efforts are intertwined, right? And that's where the skill building, where are these smart city jobs, right? Who's getting them? Is it the communities who have been traditionally disenfranchised? Well, then let's skill them so that they can get into those positions, because then it's not only getting into those jobs, it's then that expertise so that they can advocate for the communities from which they came.
Okay, fantastic. Just a reminder, we're getting close to the end, so if there's any additional questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat window. Claudia, let me get your perspective on this same question.
I would focus more on the innovation angle, because I think it's a problem that no one player in the market can actually solve. So you need governments, institutions, and private organizations to equally work on a solution, which is a typical innovation way of working, creating a platform for people to interact and to bring together their ideas and to iterate and build solutions together. So I think I would focus on this platform thought, and you can already see these kind of platforms popping up. If you look at some of the initiatives that the World Economic Forum is proposing, or that the European Commission is proposing, and I've seen some examples on local government areas as well. So it's increasingly becoming a topic. And then the second idea or thought that I want to give in is it's actually starting small, so every one of us can do something in their area of responsibility. So, which is also more like an innovation principle. So if you got an idea that's never too small and never too stupid or never wrong, you just need to try. So applying this innovator's mindset, I think, is going to help us solve this, hopefully.
Great, terrific, thank you. And Lucy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so exactly on the same page, I will just say that I think that it has to be on the same time anticipation, because I think before we were thinking about the digitalization without thinking about digital inclusion, but now more and more it has to be part of the project. I remember one account executive showed to me saying, this is reading the report and saying, this is exactly the problem of my client. And now they realize they are not touching actually one part of the users that are supposed to connect on the application. So this is becoming a huge problem. So now that is part of the, we are aware of this kind of problem. I think we are more also able to tackle the problem before than to deliver some of the technology solutions without thinking about them. And then I would say collaboration, because we are not used to be in direct access to offline population. So you need to build a strong ecosystem with NGOs who are addressing the problem daily with some of the beneficiaries and the future user, with governments, of course, and public authorities, because in some of the countries, actually, they are doing an amazing job in building already action plan on skilling the population at great scale. And India, with the National Skill India program, is a very good example. And of course, with private organization, where we can use our means and our responsibility to solve and to find good solution together. So joint forces.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for that perspective. let me just kind of wrap up with one last question for the three of you, which is we'll kind of play Aladdin and Genie time right now. So if you each got one wish and there was, one action that you could, recommend that, whether it's, governments or your colleagues or corporations or public policy makers or whoever could get started with right now, that you think in the next 12 months could really make a difference, particularly coming out of this COVID crisis, what would that one wish be? So, Angela, I'm going to start with you again.
Oh, but Lanny, I have so many wishes.
I know you do. That's right.
I'm going to go with funding. Funding for all the barriers that we mentioned. So, this is federal funding, it's corporate, it's philanthropic, it's individual donors, but funding to make that home broadband affordable, funding to provide access to computers, because mobile phones don't cut it, right, if we're talking about skilling for the future. So laptops, tablets in the home, the internet in the home, and then the digital literacy and tech support.
Yeah. On that particular note, Angela, and I don't want to get too political here with our audience, but there's a bipartisan bill that frankly and finally has been launched in both houses of the U.S. Congress called the Extreme Frontiers Act, and it's to provide major funding for technology, for science, for innovation, and that type of thing. But what it lacks is any consideration of the implications of all of this on the digital divide. So, maybe there's an opportunity for, many of the audience on this and yourself, Angela, and us to maybe collaborate and maybe provide some additional influence on that, because I think funding will be very, very critical as part of that bill going forward, or at least the effectiveness of what the bill's intended to do. So thank you for that.
That sounds like a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah. Claudia, what are your thoughts?
My initial thought was wish that I get 3 more wishes. But I guess that's kind of playing back your question and not really what you wanted for. So I would say I would hope we can fix the bandwidth or the service network. So hoping that with government and telco providers actually providing sufficient internet access to all areas, because there's discrepancies between rural and city areas. The lines are not stable. Like if COVID has shown, one thing is that the access to internet, even if you have it, it is really diverse and sometimes really bad. So this kind of network infrastructure, which is a combination of probably public infrastructure efforts and telco providers and other network partners that we see.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And Lucy, your thoughts?
Yeah. So for me, the wish would be to unlock our volunteering process, because we have the wish, I think, of most and a bigger number of Capgemini employees to volunteers. It's not always easy, and we need to prepare, but if we can unlock that, that will for sure ensure that we can maybe help each of us. Let's think about if one Capgemini employee help one person to become digitally literate, even in a year, the impact will be amazing with 270,000 people. So I think that will be my wish, with strong commitments in 2020.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you, Lucy. And Marissa, I'm not going to leave you out here. So.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to piggyback a bit on Claudia's point, but I think just what we've seen in this current health crisis has just been devastating for many people, and I think the need to access high quality broadband and being able to sustain those relationships during confinement, during isolation is just really essential, especially children learning remotely and making sure that, students in, for example, rural areas, there's parts of, the United States where, they can't access their online learning. So I think that certainly is my wish for that access to be fixed.
Okay, fantastic. Our time has pretty much come to an end. I just want to make some closing comments and share some additional information with our audience here. So first of all, let me give a big thanks to Marissa, Angela, Claudia, and Lucy. You've all been absolutely terrific. I appreciate your transparency and your forthrightness in sharing your perspectives on this very critical topic. So thank you all so much. And for the audience, if you'd like to reach out to any of the four of them to continue the discussions, please do so. The other thing I'd like to mention, Lucy's in her role in Capgemini because of our chairman and CEO's commitment to this subject. And, we as a company are very committed to this topic of digital inclusion. And both our chairman, Paul Ermlin, and our CEO, Ayman Azad, have been recently interviewed on this topic, one in Reuters and one in Forbes. And, again, I encourage you to Google those articles, and you can hear a little bit of their perspective on the topic as well. We are launching this applied research forum as a way to take research and try to translate it into action. So it's a little bit not just talking about the research itself, but with a panel of experts like we've had today to talk about the real implications of that research, and most importantly, how we can act on it and address it and really derive true value and change as a result of the research. So I encourage you to come to our next applied research session, and we'll certainly make everyone aware of that. Our Applied Innovation Exchange and our Invent organization and our Capgemini Research Institute continue to do some great work, and you have on your screen all that kind of great work that's going on. And again, I would encourage you to tune in and be part of the conversation. As I said, reach out to the speakers as you see fit, and download the Digital Divide Report and read it in its entirety. It's a fantastic piece of work. And again, I would just encourage our entire audience. This is a societal issue for all of us. So please do your share, do what you can, and make a difference. And thank you so much all for your time today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and again, have a wonderful rest